Hello, everyone. My name is Rebecca Kiesling, and I am the Executive Director of NAMI Northern Virginia. I am so happy to have everyone here tonight for our monthly meeting. It's a pretty exciting time for us right now as we are transitioning to our new year and really doing a lot with what we like to call reimagining mental health. There are a number of things that we're doing throughout the year to really talk about everything that, when we talk about mental health and treating mental health, a lot of you might think first and foremost, really regular treatment, such as sitting in a therapist's office, medication, and all of those are good. And all of those work for a lot of people. But what we're trying to talk about this year is alternative treatments that aren't necessarily what we normally think about, but can work to affect your mental health. I've had the privilege of knowing our guest tonight. I'm going to keep admitting people. I've had the privilege of knowing our guest tonight for a long time. We live in the same neighborhood. So when I started here at NAMI Northern Virginia and our paths crossed on a professional level, it was such a privilege to get to learn about the organization that she runs. We had them at NAMI Walks, Northern Virginia last year. And I got to learn more as we invited them. And now to have them here at our monthly meeting is such a gift to us because I've gotten to learn a lot more about the organization. Lauren Brennan is our guest tonight, and she's an avid knitter who learned to knit. Everything makes a lot more sense about my interactions with Lauren through the years, who learned to knit from her grandmother at age 9. She's drawn to the colors and textures of fiber art as a former photography editor who appreciates design. Also, as a former university student advisor and career counselor, she especially enjoys planning and organizing her next knitting project and setting goals to learn new fiber art techniques. Lauren is currently working as the executive director for Project Knitwell, a 501c3 nonprofit organization founded in 2010 in our area with more than 40 active volunteers. Project Knitwell provides knitting instruction to help people cope with stressful situations across 22 states, 23 countries, and 6 continents. Project Knitwell volunteers contribute over 700 hours per year to help those facing challenges learn to knit with a purpose. As a member of the National Organization for Arts and Health, Project Knitwell delivers programs which emphasize the benefits of knitting as a tool for achieving wellness, comfort, and community. Project Knitwell participated in research on the benefits of knitting for oncology nurses and was featured in the Washington Post, U.S. News, Vogue Knitting Magazine, and other publications. You can see why it's a perfect guest for us to start off our year of reimagining mental health. And we're going to take questions throughout our presentation tonight. So nobody wants to listen to me all night. I'm going to turn it over to Lauren now, and please use the chat, and I will be monitoring that, and we will get started now. So I'm going to turn it over to Lauren now. Everybody, this is Lauren Brennan.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. And I really do feel like this is the perfect fit for reimagining this space. And I'm so grateful for Rebecca for inviting us to be part of the conversation and to really think about how we can address challenges in our lives with creative outlets. And one of the things that Rebecca will not be surprised by is something that my family loves to tease me about. Not too long ago, I created these billboards for Instagram, and I joke with them that I would like to put up these billboards in real life. So these are messages that we share with our participants every day, that knitting really is a proven, well-researched wellness tool. And tonight, I want to give you more insight into that research specifically. I really like to chew on the hard science and to think about what we can do to expand that research is something that I get particularly excited about. So I'm hopeful that I can give you more insight into the sense of satisfaction that knitting brings to our participants. Since 2010, we have been really privileged to work with so many people that have benefited from knitting and the creative outlet that it provides for them. So I'm really excited to dig into some of the material that you see on these billboards and to give you more insight into how we can use our hands more. And the questions that I hope that we'll answer together tonight is helping you learn a little bit more about what Project Knitwell is all about, but most importantly, why we do what we do. And I'm hoping that it will inspire you to think about why creativity is important. There are many, many forms of creative expression, and knitting is just one of those opportunities. But also why we should be using our hands more. And a lot of people call out the fact that we're not using our hands, even though they ignite so much of our brain. Finding ways to engage with our hands in creative ways can be especially beneficial to us. So I'm really excited. Then, after sort of talking about the overall umbrella, how does knitting fit in under that umbrella? And why is knitting in particular a really great outlet for wellness, comfort, and community? We're going to talk a little bit about who knits and why they knit. What are the research supported benefits of using your hands in a rhythmic way? So you'll hear me talk about the rhythm of knitting, and that's really one of the key benefits to a lot of creative outlets. When and where is knitting accessible, and why is it considered a therapeutic craft? So what is it that makes knitting so calming? Those of us that already knit, I see some familiar names tonight, and I'm really glad to see you sort of digging into, and hopefully I can give you some more insight into why it's so beneficial to us, and really getting down to the nitty gritty on what it is that we're really trying to accomplish when we work in the community with healthcare patients, caregivers, at-risk youth, veterans, the homeless community, and newcomers, Afghan refugees, and recently incarcerated individuals as well. So throughout the presentation, you'll notice these QR codes, and that's an opportunity for you to hold up your phone, turn the camera on, and it will give you a direct link to exactly what I'm talking about that you can peruse, or you can save that link for later on your phone. But I'm hopeful that that will give you a way to dig in to the presentation as it's recorded as well. So I'm really excited to share a little bit about what Project Knitwell's foundation, and really our foundation is in the hospital setting. Our founder was faced with many treatments and surgeries for her daughter, who was a pediatric patient as an infant. And she found that it was so comforting to her, and many years later went back to the very same hospital setting where her daughter had been, and had the opportunity to teach directly the same parents facing the same exact circumstance that she was facing. Since then, we have been the one of the founding members of the National Organization for Arts and Health. We are teams of art therapists and individuals and volunteers that really think of arts as health. I was at the conference with NOAA in the fall, and one of the speakers said we should really reinvent our message and think of it as arts as health. And I thought that was a really powerful message. And I fully agree with that. There are so many opportunities for us to not only support each other. So we think of all of the rooms within our house that you see there in the upper left corner. So we're not only holding up our roof with the support of our overall fiber community. The one thing about knitters is that they are at the foundation level, they are a strong, strong community. But we're also within the house, we're finding wellness, the ability to foster positive emotions, reduce overall stress. And then at the moment of crisis, when can we come in and soothe people that need that immediate comfort, that are facing a sense of unrest in their lives? They're in transition and they may or may not be in control of the situation, but they can control each stitch that they make in their knitting process. And that really is fundamentally what it's all about. What is the overall goal of and how we approach our knitting as something that's both therapeutic and calming to us and also beneficial to our overall well-being. So, as Rebecca mentioned, we are really committed to helping a wide variety of populations. We have 5 different focus areas, including transitional populations, which include some of our most recent partners, Afghan refugees that are able to work together with each other, get to know our volunteers and learn English. There are just so many layers to what we're accomplishing when we meet people and we bring the common bond of knitting to them. So these are some of our key partners that we're working with to bring our message and really advocate for more people to learn to knit, which is really our fundamental mission, to teach them directly. We currently connect with an average of 30 people per week in individual and group sessions. We're really excited about building even more beyond that as we reopen at many of the hospitals at the beginning of this year. And this link that you'll see if you click through on that QR code is a wonderful feature on the PBS News Hour that talks specifically about artists working in unison with doctors to help with healing in the hospitals, not just for the young people that you see in this feature, but also for palliative care. So we really meet with people all across the spectrum. And I think that one of the things that people will say about crafts and those types of things, it's a good distraction. But I think of it as more than just a distraction or escapism, but it's a connection, most of all, that we're making. We're giving them an outlet to feel like they can relate on some other level outside of just their treatment plan. We're giving them an opportunity to create something that they can feel proud of, and they can feel like they're accomplishing something, even when everything else is out of sorts for them. One really interesting piece about this particular highlight is the director of an arts and health program at the University of Florida. She highlights what she refers to as social prescription. And I think it is actually a really powerful message that the more we can connect with healthcare providers, therapists, people that are working with patients where they see that it could benefit them, we are really excited to think of it as a prescription that they could provide, right? There are doctors that will say you should try yoga or you should try meditation. And this is really not that far off the path of either of those two practices. In the United Kingdom, it's very popular and well funded that knitting is provided as a insurance provided opportunity for patients. And I would love to see more of that. The Craft Yarn Council way back in 2014, as an advertisement was putting up this prescription, but it really is something that I would embrace as a practice that we would like to see more of. And we really want to advocate for more of that. And this has been part of a long, long standing history There is a TED Talk by Dr. Kelly Lambert from the University of Richmond, where she actually talks about in the 19th century, women would be prescribed knitting. They were overwrought with anxiety. And she mentions that it might sound simplistic, but those repetitive motions and the rhythmic motion that I mentioned earlier really does increase certain neurochemicals. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. And then at the same time, they're producing something. So this particular article, How Busy Hands Can Alter Our Brain Chemistry by Amy Wall. It's just a wonderful overview of all of the different aspects that not just knitting, but using our hands in general can provide. So I like to think of everything that we do under the umbrella of positive emotions. And we're thinking in terms of how can we help people flourish and how can we alleviate any languishing. So these are technical terms that you'll read about in the academic literature, which really are focused on our goal is what is optimal functioning for us? How can we have a sense of meaning, engagement, and purpose in life? And how can you accomplish that by finding a creative outlet that's a really great match for you? The whole concept of flow states, also under the umbrella that knitting is really a key aspect to that positive flow, right? When you get into meditation and the research around practices like that, flow is a really important part of what youth do when they're through play, and Montessori talks a lot about flow. It really is a mindset that you can get into that has such a positive effect on your overall well-being, and not just mentally, but physiologically as well. So openness to new experiences, general tendencies towards cognitive exploration. So essentially being curious and really seeking out new opportunities to learn. One of the best parts about knitting is that there are seemingly endless techniques to learn and new opportunities to learn from each other also. The concept of the upward spiral, also under this umbrella. So well-being and creativity are directly linked to more creativity. So if you're engaging in any amount of creative behavior, they say up to 10 to 45 minutes a day, the next day you'll have an increase in your well-being, which will then facilitate another inclination for more creativity. So it leads to an upward spiral where creativity breeds more creativity. And that is something I find to be really exciting, that we're really stimulating ourselves and we're creating a positive flow. And knitting specifically is a great tool for creative expression. And we'll talk a little bit more about why knitting in particular. And from a clinical perspective, it's so easily shared with others. It's so easily gives you that continued social interaction and that sense of accomplishment. And I think that's really key to why knitting in particular is so is focused on quite a bit. So one of the things that I think is so exciting about the Reimagining series that Rebecca mentioned earlier is sometimes I feel like psychology, and these authors talk a little bit about how psychology is traditionally focused on analyzing problems alongside remedies for those problems. And those remedies are really focused on what the negative emotion is and how can we address it, but not necessarily how we could prevent that negative emotion in the first place by providing more opportunities for positive emotions. So instead of focusing on fixing the negative, how can we focus on building the positive emotions? How can we give people opportunities to feel pride and feel that sense of hope and happiness and empathy and gratitude towards someone that's sharing their craft with them? All of these things are provided in the comfort of knitting. And one of the concepts of positive emotion that I think is particularly powerful is the broaden and build theory. So positive emotions are not just a signal or a mark of well-being, but positive emotions being giving you the ability to produce health and produce well-being. So you're leading yourself down the path to flourishing, and you're really, bottom line, you're preventing yourself from getting to a state of languishing or feeling like those negative emotions have taken over. So another really interesting concept of positive emotion theory is that positive emotions can accumulate and compound over time. That is really powerful to think about how we have the ability to transform ourselves for the better by making healthier choices, building habits that allow us to be more resilient, and thinking about ways to be intentional about that, I think is really key to that. And one of the things that we can do to be really, really intentional is thinking about developing new novel skills. So, thinking in terms of what the Global Council on Brain Health calls the novelty, and building things that will stimulate your brain and create actual new neural pathways in your brain that will allow you to enhance your overall memory, and giving you an opportunity to think about ways that you're stimulating your brain on a daily basis. And they describe four key skills that that knitting really plugs you into, including patience. Perseverance, right? The learning curve for knitting and then learning new techniques. You really do have to persevere, planning those projects, and then the final being partnerships. So gaining that sense of community when you learn something new from someone else, or you're working together on projects. And I think that those are four areas that many crafts would have, but I think knitting in particular has such a strong sense of community around it. I also get really excited to think about the ways in which research has really been supported by knitting interventions specifically. So all of these studies that are linked on our research page, which will be sure there's a QR code that will send you there as well. But knitting staving off a decline in brain function, preventing and resolving mild cognitive impairment. The neuroscience around rhythmic activities like knitting is really, really remarkable. And I think that that's one of the things that I get very excited about, because if we can find ways to prevent dementia, the Alzheimer's Association had a partnership with us not too long ago on talking about the comfort of knitting, not just for Alzheimer's patients, but their caregivers as well. So thinking about ways in which we're helping the helpers at the same time. So there's a lot of layers to all of these types of things, but knitting through recovery. So one stitch at a time. Thinking about knitting as something that you can break down into very clear steps. You can give yourself the opportunity to think about it as taking it one breath at a time and one stitch at a time is really key to that. The Knit to Quit smoking program in the United Kingdom, there's a lot of really great research, just very recent research talking about replacement addictions. And that's a really powerful piece. And so many people talk about being able to replace the same tactile aspects. Knitting can be very tactile, just in the same way that they would take a break to go smoke. They can take a break to go knit for 10 minutes. And it might sound outrageous, but many, many people report success with that sort of thing. And I think it's important to think about that as an opportunity to use knitting in that way. Managing anxiety and eating disorders. So the researchers at the University of British Columbia, the Department of Psychiatry, they were focused on knitting as a tool that they could turn to when they felt that preoccupation, if they felt the sense of fear, of anxiety. And I think that that's a really powerful piece of what they were able to accomplish with that study. 74% reported that it was calming and therapeutic to them, that it provided a sense of satisfaction and a sense of accomplishment. And that piece is really the sense of self-efficacy that you can gain from knitting, I think is particularly powerful. And the sense of having something that will alleviate any sense of stress or pressure that you're feeling. We mentioned earlier that Project Knitwell was involved in a 2016 study focused on compassion fatigue. This was before we were talking about all of our healthcare workers and the burnout effect, and really worried about making sure that our healthcare workers feel supported, to feel like they have an outlet for their own mental health is really, really key to that. So this is really a pilot study of what we hope to expand on in the future. And using a compassion fatigue inventory, we had statistically significant results that showed before a knitting intervention and after a knitting intervention with a group of oncology nurses who face really unprecedented levels of stress. The knitting really did make them feel like they had a lowered stress level and a higher compassion fatigue score. So that's a really exciting thing. And I think we're really hopeful that we can expand on that in the future and think about ways that we can really look at the research benefits of knitting and what it is that we're studying can really enhance the overall effect for people, because the more you know about the knowledge of knitting is good for you, the more it will motivate you to want to knit and to want to learn more. So this Mental Health America not too long ago had an article that talked about the benefits of knitting. It lowers your blood pressure, your overall heart rate, which we'll talk about later on in a little bit as well. Can reduce depression and anxiety, again, with slowed onset of dementia. It is a distraction from chronic pain. There are many occupational therapists and folks that suggest and use knitting as part of the treatment plan. And then an overall increased sense of well-being, reduced loneliness and isolation. There are so many key ways in which we can reduce our impact on and build a sense of community through the use of knitting. And I think that's really something that we get excited about when we have the opportunity to meet people that that know how to knit and want to come together to find an opportunity to get to know people that they wouldn't normally get to know. So that shared humanity is really, really key to the overall success of what we're all about. So the visual art making sessions reducing overall cortisol levels. So at the same time that we're hoping to build all of these good neurochemicals that I mentioned earlier, we're also trying to reduce our overall stress. So cortisol, the stress hormone, we're really trying to reduce the symptoms of burnout and improve overall well-being. Really interesting study in 2016 that's linked there as well. And then Knit for Peace, they did a survey of thousands and thousands of knitters, and some of their qualitative data points talked to people that were in poor and very poor health, and 92% of them said that knitting improved their overall health, knitting relaxed them and improved their mood. So it's pretty exciting to think about how the overall effect of what knitters feel and the way in which they feel compelled to share their craft with others, I think is really igniting so much of our sense of self-care at the same time that we're building community. So you can see here on this particular slide has two really great books that Brandy Cheyenne Harper talks about knitting for radical self-care, and she focuses in on the types of patterns that will give you a really rhythmic pattern, a really rhythmic process, and giving you an opportunity to think in the context that knitting is part of your self-care plan, I think is really, really crucial. It's not just a hobby. It's not just a craft. It's a self-care practice. And I think that that's a really important way to think about it. Sutton Foster, the Broadway actress, had a book, essentially a memoir called Hooked: How Crafting Saved My Life. And that may sound very dramatic, but it is really true for so many people. And those of us that understand what she means, it doesn't sound very dramatic to us. We understand that it really is an outlet that you can turn to, and it's an opportunity for you to feel that sense of comfort almost immediately from your projects that you're working on and the ways in which it's releasing these happiness chemicals in your body. So we're looking at things like dopamine. So overcoming an obstacle or completing your project, right? That reward chemical, even overcoming and learning something that was really hard for you to learn can release a really strong sense of dopamine. And one of the most interesting things about dopamine is even if you're not successful, and this is one of the reasons that gambling is so addictive, even if you lose at gambling, or even if if you're not successful knitting, just trying it is a big jolt of dopamine. And I think that's one of the compelling bits of research, that I think the more dopamine that we can release and the more opportunities we have for these happiness chemicals to release, serotonin. Another one, so knitting something in a repetitive way. Serotonin is also released when you're outside. So, knitting in public is very, very mainstream nowadays, right? So giving yourself an opportunity to take that project on the road with you. You can't always sit at a swim meet and do yoga, but you could obviously sit at a game or sit at a meet with your knitting. So gathering and really serotonin is all about mood stabilizing. So it gives you that opportunity to feel more stability and a sense of flourishing at the same time. Endorphins are those painkillers. So with the chronic pain research, trying something new and something artful like a freestyle design can release a lot of endorphins, especially if it's something that you feel is artful and creative. And then oxytocin, so giving compliments or giving a gift, that love hormone. So releasing oxytocin by having a finished product that you're proud of, that you can give away, something that's really exciting. So these are some of the reasons why knitting in particular can release those good chemicals. But I like to think of any act of creative expression as something that you can build a habit around. And this Stanford researcher, BJ Fogg, he wrote this book specifically about the small changes in your life that can change everything. And his concept is really quite simple, that you take a behavior that you want. So let's say you want to have a meditative practice at the end of each day, but let's say you're like me and you're terrible at meditation. But if you put a project in my hands, I can meditate with my hands. And meditation is a real thing. And I think that making the tiny bits of progress every day on a project that adds up to a beautiful sweater or a shawl or something, a gift that you can give someone, that can really nurture your overall sense of well-being at the same time that you're creating something. He talks about the ripple effect, where when you feel good doing something, you'll want to do it more. And then that emotional response will guide even more beneficial habits from there. So the ripple effect is very similar to that broaden effect that I mentioned earlier. Once it hits the water, there are constant ripples that come out from it. And every time I start a new project, I now sort of think of this ripple effect that it has on my life. And I think it's really great to think about any act of creative expression or any habit that you have developed as an opportunity to benefit you and continue to benefit you, as it makes that ripple and fans out from there. So I want to open for any questions that you might have in the chat or anything that I can tell you more about at this point before I dig into kind of what knitting and what the knitting world is all about. I want to see if there are any. Let's see if I can pull up the chat here. And I know we have some knitters in the batch tonight, which is so exciting. So if you have any insights or anything you would like to share, don't hesitate. I think of knitting as one of the more universal crafts that many people have tried. And when you think about who knits, right, I think of everyone can knit. It's really accessible. This is a quote from Michelle Obama in the Vogue Knitting magazine. Her book, The Light We Carry, also has about 100 pages where she continuously refers back to her knitting practice as a metaphor for life and the calming effects that it had for her. Facing uncertainty is something that we are all overcome, or we've all had to overcome in the past few years. And she used knitting during the pandemic to learn specifically about what it takes to face that uncertainty and to think about taking one stitch at a time. And it was certain that she would end up with a sweater at the end, right? But each stitch mattered to her. And there's a really powerful message in that. And I think she's really leading the charge to get more people motivated to try knitting in particular, which I think is really exciting because I think it is particularly accessible for so many people. So if you really break it down, right, we talked about why you would want to knit, but if we take it back a step, what is knitting exactly? Like, what is it really just sticks and string? And when it comes down to it, that's really what it's all about. It's a series of loops. The second, they move from one side, one stick to the other, right? And it creates a continuous strand of loops that one by one, each row is creating a knitted fabric. And the beauty of that, it's so simple. Right? It couldn't be any simpler than a series of loops that create a really great textile. And the way in which we accomplish that is really just broken down into two different stitches, the knit stitch and the purl stitch. And all the combinations and all the variations on that are really exciting, and all the patterns that are available. This book by Stephanie Pearl McPhee, who I like to think of her as sort of a knitting comedian. You didn't know that there are knitting comedians, but she has written numerous books that are really interesting, and you can find at your local library that really give more insight into her process and why knitting has made such an impact on her life as well. So I'd invite you to check her out if you're interested, and you'll find her books at the library in amongst all the patterns and the Learn to Knit books. So fundamentally, if we take it even a step back even farther, if we really think about what is it that's stimulating us the most, it's truly the use of our hands. And the hands, when we are using our hands, not just in a rhythmic way, but really in any way, we are igniting over 60% of the surface area of our brains. And that is really remarkable when you think about how important it is for us to ignite all the areas within our brains. That means that we really need to focus on using our hands in unique ways, right? We can all use our thumbs, right? Our kids might use their video games and all of that, but that is very isolated, right? That's very isolated use of your hands. But if you're using your hands in reformatting, and the neuroplasticity of our brains is remarkable. So having the opportunity to reformat and redirect those neural pathways, which I think of as highways within our brain, right? We want all of the highways to be well maintained. We want to be sure that we drive on all of those roads as often as possible so that they are really in good shape, and we can keep all of those highways open and running at full steam, and we can run at full steam whenever we need to. This book by Frank Wilson is a fascinating anthropological view of how the hand has shaped our brain, our language, and our overall human culture. He talks about how ancient cultures would use things like worry stones and mala beads and other comforting tools that really fundamentally are using the same motion that we use in knitting, where that was very comforting to people. And I think that that's a really interesting aspect of the motion that we use specifically with knitting, which is bilateral. So you're using both hands at the same time. Whereas crochet and needlework and some of the others, there's usually a hand that stabilizes the craft and one hand that's a little bit more active. There's definite benefits to that as well. But if you're igniting both sides of your brain at the same time, and you're bilateral craft aspect is a really important part of the research, specifically thinking in terms of knitting itself. So how we use our hands is just very fundamental and very crucial to our overall well-being. And I like to think of knitting as something that really can increase your dexterity and your eye-hand coordination. So when young people learn to knit in the Waldorf tradition, for instance, they are constantly uh, teaching them in order to fine-tune those fine motor skills. And we as humans are remarkable in terms of what we're able to accomplish in our fine motor control. And we should focus on that. We should give our kids more opportunities for fine motor, just as we give them so many opportunities for gross motor control with sports and large play and so forth. So knitting also has the added benefit of you can literally prevent arthritis and tendonitis. So moving our fingers and keeping our joints lubricated can reduce the risk of arthritis. And you don't want your joints to sit still and to stiffen. The actual cartilage can lose its structural integrity. And it's so important that we don't think of it as something where we're wearing out our hands, but instead we're exercising them and we're maintaining the structure of that cartilage the more that we use our hands. So I really think that the overall benefit of helping ignite our brain through the use of our hands and also keeping our hands healthy is so crucial. And I think that there are so many uh, signs just like this, right? The 5 health benefits of knitting. And some of these we directly talked about already. But I also want to talk a little bit about some of the researchers that are really thinking in terms of what it is that all of the knitting research tells us. So Betsan Corkle, who's a wonderful researcher out of the United Kingdom, she's also an occupational therapist. Her book, Knit for Health and Wellness, is really quite simple when you break it down. It's all about thinking about using knitting as part of an overall journey and thinking about how we can embrace the complexity of our brains in a simple process of knitting and creating a more flexible mind at the same time. So she uses this as an equation that she had created many years ago that talks about all of the benefits of knitting, all in these different categories, right? So knitting equals not just the patterns of movement. So I mentioned the rhythmic, repetitive, crossing the midline, so igniting both sides of our brain at the same time, bilaterally. It's a coordinated exercise that can become automatic. So you're giving yourself an opportunity for some muscle memory in there as well, which is really beneficial to your brain. You're literally, when you develop muscle memory, you're literally creating a new neural pathway. And that's really, really good for your brain. And then outside of that, the hand position. So not only are you creating a space, kind of a bubble or a zone around you, but when you go into a social setting with a lot of people and you have your knitting there with you, let's say you're at a yarn shop or you're in a situation, it gives you kind of a social personal space, right? It gives you an opportunity to feel like you can be in a new area and feel safe and comforted by that personal buffer that you have around you. it also gives you something very natural to talk about. So, meeting people and engaging with people is so easy to do when you have knitting as a shared practice. It gives you a sense of belonging almost immediately. And you can share new ideas that you've had, new patterns that you've tried out. And that really, I think that easy banter that she mentions is really genuinely true. And it's such an opportunity to meet people that you wouldn't necessarily normally get to meet. And I think about how one thing that I think we really need in our communities right now is opportunities to meet people that are outside of our normal realm, giving us a sense of that shared humanity and that opportunity to meet people that can give us insight into how their lives are, and giving an opportunity to gain insight into how we can relate to each other, even if we don't necessarily have everything in common. And I like to say that the people that I've met through knitting are some of the sort of the people that I cherish the most, because I wouldn't necessarily have had the opportunity to meet them if it weren't for knitting. So, and we talked a lot about some of these enriched environment aspects as well, but I do think that it fundamentally is such a calming and soothing process to learn to knit. And then I love that she puts down here, she emphasizes how portable knitting is. So just like from the clinical perspective, it really is quite, it's such an easy, accessible craft that you can take anywhere. You can park it just as easily as you can pick it right back up again. And I think that is really key to thinking about why knitting in particular is such a great creative outlet. And stitchlinks.com is Betsson Corkle's website, which is such a wonderful outlet to learn from and to gain a sense of insight on what she has accomplished in terms of qualitative research. I think is really interesting to look at as well. So I love this quote. The art of happiness lies in the power of extracting happiness from common things. And I use this as an intro to some of the metaphors that I like to think about related to knitting. I'll come back to that previous slide in a second. But one of the things that I like to think about when I think about knitting is what are all of the layers, right? What are the things that knitting provides for me? And thinking of them as everyday objects. So these are all metaphors, right? We could play games with metaphors all day. Maybe that's a second creative hobby that I have, but knitting as a parachute. So being prepared with a tool that can help you float to safety when you feel like you are required to take a leap into a new challenge, you're at a point of crisis, or you're at a point where you have to transition into something new, but having your knitting there as something that can recalibrate you and bring you back to center. Knitting as a surfboard. So riding out those waves, same thing. You're facing something where you're finding a challenging circumstance where it's hard to get your footing, but you can just focus on the next stitch and float right through. Knitting as a water bottle. So it's a very portable craft that you can take small sips of whenever you feel like it. Knitting as a shield. I talked a little bit about that sense of having a clear comfort barrier around you. It also gives you something to talk about, right? It's an icebreaker, and it gives you a chance to open doors for conversation. So knitting as a doorbell, giving you a chance to think about the simple pleasures of knitting, the textures, the colors, the patterns that you're creating. One of the things that I get most excited about is when we think about knitting in the context of design. And one of our Georgetown University sponsors a series of color theory workshops, and we're currently running them as a color cafe where you can participate and just have a conversation about why is it that certain colors and certain combinations are harmonious, and thinking in terms of that, those colors and those textures and the and color palettes that we create can be a really exciting part of the process. And it's very simple, right? You have certain yarn choices that you can make and ways to combine them, and ways that you can create pattern that can stimulate you. So knitting is show and tell. This is one of my favorites actually, because I feel like as adults, we don't get as many opportunities to show off our creative projects. But if you can wear it, if you can give it as a gift, it can be a really a rewarding way to connect with others and avoid loneliness. So going to a knitting circle that gives you the opportunity to share and to see other people's show and tell. I think that's really exciting. Knitting as a biography. One of the layers of knitting that's so powerful is how sentimental it can be to so many people. How you learn to knit, and who taught you to knit, and how you feel knitting impacts you and how it resonates with you can be very biographical. And I think it's fun to meet people and hear their stories and get to know them based on how knitting has impacted their life. And then finally, knitting as a memorial. So hand knits that are passed down through generations. Knitting can be a tool to cope with grief. Anne Hood, who is an author who will be at our book discussions next month, she talks a lot about stitching memories into similar to the prayer shawl tradition that many people have, and thinking about knitting as something that is a really powerful way to make an impact. There's a nonprofit actually that will finish knits that loved ones that passed away left behind. That was going around in the news very recently, and such a great organization to help finish whatever that unfinished work was, and to allow the person that's grieving to have that item, either a sweater to wear or a shawl to wear. And it's such a great initiative. I feel really excited when I hear about those types of things, because it does really share that sentimental tradition. So we talked a little bit about what's going on for you when and why knitting is relaxing. And I love this quote that from Suzanne Cologne, who is actually the meditation group leader that I mentioned earlier. So she leads meditations with knitting as part of the practice. And she talks a lot about coming to her knitting just once a day for 10 minutes at a time. And it gives her a chance to really take a calmer breath with every stitch and understand that when things around me may not be okay, I can still be okay. There's certainty in every stitch that you take. And Dr. Herbert Benson, who's a Harvard Medical School professor, he talks specifically about what he refers to as the relaxation response. So whenever you have a fight or flight response that's literally initiating a toxic response in your body, so chronic stress and high cortisol levels are a constant state of fight or flight. So how can we find ways to initiate a relaxation response by slowing our breathing, relaxing our blood, or relaxing our muscles, and in turn leading to actual reductions in our blood pressure and our heart rate? So thinking about his essential steps to that, he talked specifically about using a repetition of a phrase, a sound, or a muscular activity. And you can tell that repetition of a phrase, that's very commonly used in meditation. But a repetition of a muscular activity is knitting. And that's really the key to thinking about those rhythmic motions that we make. And then the second piece of that is a passive disregard for anything that's going on outside of your daily repetition, right? Or your process that you're going through, that flow that you're hitting. When you're able to recalibrate yourself and just think about the next stitch or the next row in your pattern, you're taking yourself out of what it might be stressing you out and the everyday thoughts that you're trying to move on from. So I think that that's a really key aspect to thinking about what it is that we're trying to accomplish with our knitting. So not only are you thinking in terms of the physiological effects of that, reducing your blood pressure, which in turn boosts your overall immune system, improving your brain cognition, which we talked a lot about, fighting overall inflammation. So anytime that we can reduce our blood pressure and calm our fight or flight response is really beneficial. But also, what about the knitting project is giving you an overall sense of well-being? How is it shifting your perspective or reinforcing those positive emotions and those positive behaviors? And this slide was a Instagram that one of therapeutic knitting, one of the researchers out of the United Kingdom put up. And she was looking at, what do you want your next project, your next knitting project to bring you a sense of? Are you most interested in it bringing you a challenge? Do you want to try something really intricate and difficult? Are you looking for achievement? Like, do you want to knit for charity and knit 100 hats for babies in the NICU? So that sense of overall achievement. Do you simply want it to calm you? Are you going to do what Anne Hood calls nonsense knitting, where she's not trying to create anything? She's literally just improving and knitting a stitch back and forth that doesn't lead to really any final product. That can be really calming. A sense of joy. Does it give you a sense of belonging and community because you're sharing a knit along project? So you're knitting the same pattern that your friend is knitting, and you're seeing how your color choices contrast with their color choices. And that's bringing you a sense of joy and connection. So there's so many ways in which, again, the layers of knitting can bring you a sense of overall it's sort of a sense of overall well-being. And then finally, what's most important to you? Is it the finished item, so the product in the end, or the process involved in making it? And art therapists are constantly talking about this, and that it's about the process more than the product for most people. And the more that we can feel like the process is just as important as what we've created, the better off we'll be. Or if both of them could be equally important. But that's an important way to think about what we're trying to accomplish overall. So this is a picture of Keisha, who is one of our participants over a decade ago. She was a mother in the NICU who our founder approached at MedStar and said, "Would you like to learn to knit?" And her immediate response was, "I'm not good at that sort of thing. I'm not creative. I'm not interested. But thanks anyway." She was very nice about it, but very, very adamant that she's just not good at that kind of thing. And whenever anyone says that to me, when we're asking them if they'd like to try to knit or if they've ever tried to knit, they'll say, "Well, I'm not really good at that sort of thing." And I like to say, "Well, you're not good at it yet." And that, I think, is a key aspect to thinking about trying something outside of your box, right? That novel new skill, and giving yourself an opportunity to think about this is just giving it a shot, right? Seeing what it's like. And she has come really full circle and is now an avid knitter, even 10 years later. She's on our board of directors, and she is really one of our biggest supporters, because she really feels like knitting does bring her back to a sense of the present moment, releases all the worry and the tension and the stress in that particular moment, and truly found the relief relief that we're hoping to provide when we approach people who are facing direct moments of crisis. And it was something that she could do to keep her hands busy while she was, and she was able to comfort her son, like you can see here in the picture. So, and create a little sweater for him and have something to give to him that before she was allowed to hold him, she's able to create something for him. So that's just one of the ways in which I think it does really, those of us that know that calming sense, it really makes sense to us. So this process that many of the people we work with go through, and many people will be facing a sense of grief or a sense of something that they have to process a really powerful sense of loss. It may be a loss of a sense of control. It may be a literal loss and a grief process that they're going through. But the most important part about that is the only way out is through, right? So how can we get them through those moments by naming the loss? And one of the ways I think thinking about that in terms of knitting as something that can not just bring you back to equilibrium, but it can also be a meditative process where you're naming the loss with every stitch. So the tradition of prayer shawls and providing an opportunity for you to take every stitch as a chance to reflect or describe a situation. So using a process where you're actually naming each row or each stitch has a word associated with it that's can be very meditative. And I like to think of it, even if you're not literally thinking of it in terms of a prayer shawl or a traditional practice that you might find in meditation, you can also schedule your knitting to be essentially scheduled worry time, right? So you're thinking about it as a moment in your day where you're recalibrating and you're giving yourself a chance to come back to equilibrium. So all of the thoughts that are swirling in your head can be focused, and your thought pattern at that time can just be focused on the next stitch in your knitting, and it doesn't necessarily have to be as heavy as you might feel coming into that moment. And I always use the word recalibrate, but I really do think that that's part of the power for me, and I think for so many people that we meet and talk to every day. So the comfort and that comforting layer, I think, is really key. So this is an exercise that I think is really part of that overall process. And I wanted to put this in here as part of the why I think you could think of different creative practices outside of, you can have more than one creative practice, obviously, but also just the environments that you're in and the people that you interact with, the concept of heaters versus coolers. So if you think, and you could even jot these down, and you make a list of all of the people that you regularly interact with. And then make a list of all of the environments that you inhabit. So it could be everything from the office, your car, the different places that you visit throughout your week. And then list the usual activities that you do, right? So everything from meetings and laundry, knitting, any other creative practices that you might already do or aspire to do. And then imagine each of those items separately and notice how your body reacts. If when you think of knitting, do you get the same reaction, the same tense reaction that you get when you think of the laundry? It might not be for you, right? Or do you think about it and you think about, oh, I can remember my grandmother knitting, and that's really calming, and it gives me a sense of possible, I could feel more connected to something that she cared about. Does it give you that sort of soft smile and that sense of relief, and a really that can be really telling. And then when you think of all of these different people that you interact with and the environments you're in, think about them in the context of which are the heaters, right? Which are kind of burning you up inside, and which are the coolers that are kind of giving you that sense of relief and a chance to cool off at the end, and seek out a way to balance those heaters and the coolers. You're always going to have both, right? That's the real key. And when you watch the kids movie Inside Out, right? The character Joy has to have sadness. They have to coexist with each other. And I think of heaters and coolers in the same sort of way. So it's really important to think about also in terms of like, what's your circle of influence? Like, what do you have an opportunity to contribute in that day? I know during the pandemic, I knit more than I'd ever knit in my entire life because it was the one thing that I could make progress on. It was the one piece that I could continue to see the sweaters grow. I could continue to see the new color choices that I'd make create something. And I think that that's one of the reasons why I'm so drawn to knitting in particular, because there's endless combinations and endless opportunities. So again, the QR code will give you an article that digs into other creative outlets and other ways, everything from gardening to cooking. It doesn't necessarily have to be knitting, although obviously I've been emphasizing that quite a bit. I think there are many ways to think about within knitting the different types of projects. This is a really great pattern book called Knit Yourself Calm, Creative Path to Managing Stress. So this is a book that focuses on different types of projects to help you think about how knitting can really calm you. So that quick and easy project that's, I call it TV knitting, right? You could watch TV at the end of the day while knitting and feeling that sense that you're productive at the same time. Portable projects. So always having a project in my bag is something that I find to be really calming when I'm in a waiting room, or if I'm waiting extra, I sometimes think of that as a bonus, right? I'm not disappointed that I have to wait extra. It's more opportunity to knit. Group projects, so things where you're working together in unison with people to complete a mission. It could be everything from a quilt project, like our participants at the USO at Fort Belvoir are putting together a blanket project that will travel to other USOs, and they're feeling that sense of camaraderie, where every USO will have a different design in the quilt. Big projects. So those are those challenging projects where you really have to overcome a lot and learn a lot more about it. And I think that big projects can be really rewarding in the end. And then new skills projects. So finding opportunities to try something outside of the box, right? That novel new skill that you haven't tried before can be really, really stimulating. And those of us that sometimes focus a lot on the quick and easy and doing the same patterns over and over again, it can be really beneficial to try something that we haven't tried before. A lot more dopamine opportunities there. And the best part about knitting is that it really can be broken down into 4 simple steps. And that really is how we teach knitting. You start with fabric that's already cast on. So you're starting directly with the knit stitch. And all of you that are here with us tonight are invited to participate in our Knitwell in the Cloud program. So you can sign up via that QR code, or you can visit projectknitwell.org and look for Knitwell in the Cloud under our programs link. And we offer a kit of materials and 4 lessons via Zoom. And you can sign up directly, and we will match you with an instructor that has experience helping you. We can see your hands, they can see, you can see their hands, and we will guide you through the steps of the process. We also have a 28-page resource guide for new knitters that has pictures like you see there, and opportunities for you to use that depending on your learning style. But it's really nice to have the lessons on Zoom because it gives you the opportunity to have essentially a live YouTube, right? And you can get your questions answered, and someone can watch you directly in that way. So I really hope that you'll join us for Knitwell in the Cloud and jumpstart your knitting practice right then and there. So these are some great quotes of sort of reasons why people love knitting. I'd love for any of you that are knitters or have a creative outlet, let us know, what do you love about it? It could be everything from a creative outlet to it could be exercise or gardening or whatever it is that stimulates you. Maybe you could pop in the chat what you love about it. These quotes, I think, are just a wonderful example of all those layers of knitting that I talked about. So it gives me something to do with my hands that prevents me from snacking, right? So the alternatives when you're knitting, what are you not doing is another aspect to it as well. So what fades away into the background? Doom scrolling on your phone. We had a group of nurses at the University of Delaware that one of the students said, the best part about knitting is it's keeping me off my phone. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's really exceptionally powerful in so many ways. So especially for college students these days. So the precious gifts that the grandmother could give and carry on that tradition within her family. Seeing people's faces when they get a handmade item brought me into contact with great people. That I definitely agree with that. And, it makes me feel like me again at the end of an exhausting day. So that I think, these sort of summarize kind of those overall benefits. And let's see if I can get the chat to cooperate here. Let's see. I love knitting because it's stress relief. Yes, absolutely. I found that it to be my yes, it's tactile sensation and a form of meditation that can be so grounding. Absolutely. I think that's really true. And I think that one of the best parts, let's see what else. Oh, yes. And the sense of control. Yes. So when you're going through cancer treatments and being able to knit your own hats, right, for chemo hair loss, and you're really given a chance to feel that sense of control. I think that's really, really key. Yes, I really feel like the best parts about what we do to kind of give each other insights into the overall sense of well-being that we can provide. I think one of the most unique parts about knitting in particular is how strong the community is. And there are so many advocates for arts and health that are also knitters. And I think that that's really key to thinking about which creative outlets are especially powerful. And this scan code will bring you to our research bibliography. So all of the articles that I mentioned tonight are just a subset, a tiny, tiny subset of hundreds and hundreds of articles that are out there that talk about creative expression as really fundamental to who we are and how we can flourish. So I'm very excited to think about ways that that you'll all take that message with you into whatever craft you're interested in. So thank you so much for joining us. And I wonder if there are any questions. I think feel free to let me see if the
Well, I want to thank Lauren, first of all, for joining us tonight. This was great. I learned so much. I am definitely one of those people that says, I don't do that. And I want to tell just two little stories as we look at the chat. First of all, like Keisha, I remember, Lauren and I were introduced because of one of my daughters, does musical theater, and her sons do theater, and that's our elementary school theater program. And so that same daughter was a micro preemie. She was 10 and a half weeks early. And I remember my mom sitting with me in the hospital, and she was just fidgeting with her hands, and somebody came up to her and said, do you knit? And my mom said, I do, and I would love to have something. And they brought her over just a basket. And this was at Georgetown. And it helped her so much. And she ended up knitting just hundreds of little tiny caps
Oh,
for all the, for NICU babies. And she did it for years, but it was just so cathartic to her to have that and to be able to sit with me. No, that's a great question, Joan. Why don't you put, Joan, if you want to email info@nami-nova.org, I will get your contact information to Lauren.
yes, that would be wonderful. And that is
Absolutely.
one of the questions that we are asked constantly on how can I do this in my area? And we have had a number of folks that have started similar programs in their area, and we would love to help in any way that we can to share our expertise. We can share kits, we can share opportunities to branch out, and I'm constantly excited and also overwhelmed by how many people there are that want to share this craft with other people. And that's really one of the most exciting parts about our organization. Ways that we can expand our mission and to share it beyond our borders have been really broadened by the ability to have online programs like this, where people come from all over the world. It's such a silver lining of the pandemic that we're given this opportunity to meet people all over the world and give them the same insights that we've been providing to people, on with the boots on the ground here in the DC area for so long. So we would love to connect and figure out ways that we can help share our mission beyond this area for certain. Yeah. And
Something
Marby
else.
talks about chronic illness, and not when chronic illness is something that you're really faced with, and finding something that can stabilize that for so many people, knitting and rhythmic crafts, yoga, tai chi, all sorts of very rhythmic behaviors can really comfort the sort of wild circuits, right? So all the circuits in our brain are firing at the same time. When we have chronic pain, we're overreacting. So how do we create really clear, I think of them as pathways, right? So clear highways for those circuits to really gain control. And I'm not a neuroscientist, but there are neuroscientists that talk about this sort of thing all the time. And so many great talks that you can watch online that talk about neuroplasticity in particular. So
We're talking about mental illness as well. When we're talking about needing to find calm, and we're talking about the need to take that breath, we talk about that a lot in our presentations. And Lauren won't remember this, but in those same days, one of my dark times, she can look back and probably pinpoint where it was in our relationship. But I remember walking into a gym and I was in a pretty bad headspace that I needed to go back into treatment for myself. But Lauren was sitting and she was knitting, and I watched, and
yeah.
I, was running all over the place, but I kept watching, but I ended up sitting next to her and grabbing some yarn. And she said, "Do you want to try?" And just like she said, and this was years ago, before each of our current roles. And I didn't, but I played with that yarn, and it was just so, I remember just the repetition, and it was watching her and just having something in my hands, and a lot more makes sense now. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and just the tactile sensation, right? I mean, when
absolutely.
you're in a yarn shop and all the colors and I think of that as a whole separate hobby, right? Shopping for yarn is a whole separate ball game. So, the tactile sensation really is powerful. And there are actual studies that talk about watching. So watching someone knit, like watching a video of someone knit, it has some of the same benefits. And that visualization and visualizing yourself knitting. So if you're having trouble falling asleep, this might sound absolutely out of control, but there's a study that talks about visualizing having the same benefits. So if I'm having trouble sleeping, I will think of knitting. I'll just think of the rhythmic nature of it, and it will calm me in the same way. So I don't even have to have it in my hands and, be disrupting my poor husband and pulling out my knitting in the middle of the night. But I can just think of the stitches or think of the pattern in my head. And that's the visualization research is fascinating as well. And same thing with music, like visualizing yourself playing the piano. Same benefits as actually playing the piano. Fascinating. So,
Someone asked, do you have a network of people across? So I knowing that you do have, you've done presentations and you have this worldwide.
We do now.
group.
Yeah, we do now. And that really is the power of our Knitwell in the Cloud program. So all of our instructors are all over the world. And that's so not just our participants, but our instructors who we have taught in our method, our teaching method, and sort of given them the outlet to learn how we approach those 4 steps and break it down and so forth. So really our network has expanded well beyond, but one of our challenges is figuring out how would we be at a hospital in the Boston area, for instance. Like we have a great connection there. What would that look like? And well, I'm sure Rebecca knows when it comes to running a nonprofit, there's insurance and there's policies and incorporation and there's a lot of logistics. Yeah, just details like that. So but that's in our strategic plan. And what would it look like for us to have a chapter model? I used to work for Make-A-Wish, and they are such a powerful infrastructure that started really in the 80s. And they've been around for such a long time, and they have staff, so many staff members nationwide. And I know that NAMI is a national organization, right? So
We have 660 affiliates throughout the country. So you can always contact the affiliate. So there's a state organization in every single state, and there's 660 affiliates like myself throughout the country. So you can always contact the Boston affiliate. They'd love to.
Well, that would be the way to do it. And that's really what we're always looking for, partnerships too.
Yeah.
So that's really we're so small and mighty, right? But it gives us an opportunity to stretch our legs, right?
Absolutely.
So we're so grateful for this sort of opportunity and new audience to share with. So
Well, I'm thrilled, and I know that we did have some NAMI national folks on here, because our national office is actually in my affiliate area. It's in Arlington. So I saw some friends on here. So if you have any questions for Lauren, I'd love, I can forward them to her directly. You see it's info@nami-nova.org. And I hope we're in the final planning stages for our walk. So I hope you can come back to it, and I hope we can have you in other ways as well. I love this for mental health, but also other health benefits, because there are just so many in the calming, but also the recentering. And I learned so very much. So I'm so appreciative of your time tonight, Lauren.
Oh, well, thanks so much for having me. And I think our mental health is linked to so many parts of our life, right? That is really the foundation. Our mental health is the foundation to all of our health and well-being. So I think that's a key part of that is creative expression and the ways that we can find opportunities to do that. And I'm so grateful that there's so much synergy and so many connections that we can make with neighbors, and opportunities when our children connect with theater arts and giving them that outlet. It's so valuable for them. So I'm so grateful for those connections that and both my boys are knitters, so they both learned to knit, and a lot of theater folks are knitters too.
I can imagine.
So,
You say hi to those 2 beautiful guys for me, and tell them number 2 says hi. So
all right, absolutely. And I really appreciate all the familiar names that I see tonight. And thank you so much for coming. And do let me know if you have any other questions or anything I can share more about. So
we will have this up on our YouTube channel in just a few days. So please take a look there if you are looking for any of this wonderful information that Lauren has. I put up the links to some of the QR codes that she shared. I was putting up the links in the chat if you needed them. Also, please take a look. We will also link this back on our website, which is NAMI-northernvirginia.org, for this information and so much more. I'm also going to put up that great article that linked eating disorders and knitting, because this is Eating Disorder Awareness Week this week. So I'm going to be putting that out and linking it back to your website, because what a great, it was kind of set up for that. So that's great. So appreciate everyone joining us, and stay tuned for next month's monthly meeting. So I appreciate everyone coming tonight. Have a great night.
Thanks.